recalls conditions aboard the Queen Mary.
And one or two occasions we ran into quite considerable light flak, and there were always planes over, especially approaching the coast. And the noise sounded pretty dreadful. It would be transmitted down the ship, and they would all be down below, herded, thousands and thousands of them, locked up down there, and no possible hope of getting up to the top decks.
Both queens survived the war, apparently without serious incident. But according to a retired West German executive, Horst Kessler, the Queen Elizabeth had a very narrow escape from disaster in 1942. A U-boat commander during the war, Kessler's memory of a little-known incident is supported by his surviving shipmates from the submarine U-704.
Ja, wir waren auf der 6. Feindfahrt. Und hatten schon 1,5 Monate.
We had already spent 1.5 months on the Atlantic and had seen action several times. At the end of November, we were heading for our home port in France. The sea was very rough, as you would expect that time of the year. And we had very strong winds from the west, force 10.
7 und starken Westwind 8 bis 10 in den Böen.
There were, as usual, 4 men on the bridge on lookout. They were all strapped in their positions so that they would not be washed overboard by the high seas. Simulated here with German footage from the Battle of the North Atlantic, Kessler's story continues. His lookouts cited what they described simply as a very big ship. While preparing his attack, Kessler reached the conclusion that the target could only be the liner Queen Elizabeth.
Ja, wenn man so ein großes Schiff zufällig...
When purely by accident you have an enemy ship of that size in front of your torpedo tubes, you must understand, it is the absolute situation in the life of a U-boat captain.
Und in dem Moment treten alle Beweggründe, alle
At that moment, you put everything else in the background, and you have only one thought. What can I do most quickly to take maximum advantage of this lucky situation? Kessler fired 4 torpedoes. An explosion was heard, but the Queen Elizabeth was not hit. Probably Kessler's torpedoes detonated short of their target. In any case, a fateful moment had passed that might have significantly altered the course of the war.
Das dauerte nun einige Minuten.
A few minutes went by, and then came a report from the sound technician that we didn't like at all. The Queen Elizabeth's engines could be heard, the noise from the screws of the ship, and it became fainter and fainter. And of course, that meant that she was continuing on her course, getting further away. And naturally, it was hopeless to try to follow her. By war's end, the Queens Mary and Elizabeth had transported some 1.5 million troops and earned an eloquent tribute from Winston Churchill. He said, "The Queens challenged the fury of Hitlerism in the Battle of the Atlantic. Without their aid, the day of final victory must unquestionably have been postponed." It is the 5th and final day of the QE2's passage to New York. Whether she will continue on the North Atlantic in future years is a matter of some uncertainty. More and more vacation cruises are planned for her. Some old hands among the crew consider cruising a frivolous business for a great liner. but the trade has never been more profitable and popular.
You want to sit, Joey? Yes, please.
Ambrose Light Tower, one of the most famous Atlantic checkpoints, marking the approach to New York Harbor. At this approximate position, a beacon has been maintained for more than 150 years. A New York pilot comes aboard to assist in harbor navigation, his presence required by law. On this day, New York tugboats are on strike, as well as the specialized pilots who normally supervise docking. For 5 days, life aboard has moved in rhythm with the sea. Now a more frenetic pace intrudes, and the age-old magic of the ocean voyage ends abruptly. Manhattan. QE2's arrival must be precisely calculated according to the tide. She eases cautiously into the Hudson River.
Dead slow ahead, starboard.
Dead slow ahead, starboard.
Approaching the dock, the harbor pilot and the captain form a committee of 2 in charge of the ship. With tugs, docking would be routine. Without them, controlling the QE2 67,000 tons can be a nightmare.
Stop port. Stop port. Stop starboard. Stop starboard.
The situation has become awkward. A subsurface current forces QE2's bow ever closer to the dock while swinging her stern downriver.
Come on.
The first docking attempt is abandoned. Now, with only feet to spare, it's a question of whether the ship and the dock will make serious contact.
Slow ahead. Slow ahead to the starboard engine. Slow ahead, starboard only. Slow ahead, starboard.
The QE2's 296th voyage is over.
Finish with engines.
All right, CCR, let's finish with engines now.
Well, we finally got it ready. Look, it was a little bit too early on the pedal.
Yeah, I know it was.
On the bridge, there's a sense of accomplishment and relief. But for the disembarking passengers, a cold shock lies in store. For 5 days, they've basked in tender, loving care. But this is New York.
Purchased while you're away, or do you have everything with you?
No, everything is here.
Everything is here.
I don't know where to go. See this man here. Why don't you get in your car and pull up to the people, huh? Hold it right there. Hold it right there. 65.
58.
Yeah, you pull up full. Yeah, you pull up full.
Well, can you put the big one in the front? Maybe the big one is very bulky.
Give me that. 81. 81.
58.
That's the best tip I got. Make it 17 cents.
Make it 17 cents, yeah.
And an English penny.
In the era after the Second World War, European supremacy on the Atlantic was finally challenged. On her maiden voyage in 1952, the liner United States shattered all speed records, beating the Queen Mary's fastest time by 10 hours. It was the end of a cherished British monopoly, and some Americans couldn't resist rubbing it in.
I just want to tell you that it's been a wonderful trip on this United States. It was a great, great trip. That's a beautiful ship, and I understand the Canard Line gave it a 21 torpedo salute when it came in today. We'll see you all, and that's enough for nothing. Thank you.
With elaborate ceremony, the Hales Trophy, offered to the fastest Atlantic liner, changed hands. Few realized that soon the distinction would seem as quaint as the trophy itself. For 2 decades after the war, the transatlantic business boomed. It was like the 20s all over again, and behind the scenes, great plans were made. The liner France was launched in 1960. She was intended to compete directly with the British Queens, and in the tradition of the Normandy, the ship was a study in elegance. Even as the France completed her maiden voyage, the era of the Atlantic superliner was coming swiftly to an end. Long heralded, the transatlantic airliner was finally coming of age. Propeller-driven planes steadily drew more passengers. Finally, the jetliner, faster, smoother, and cheaper, would capture the transatlantic business almost overnight. By the mid-60s, it was all over. For a few years, the Queens Mary and Elizabeth hung on. In many ways, time seemed to stand still aboard the liners. Almost empty sometimes, they sailed on with a certain grand momentum.
First lucky number. Blind 20, 2020. Blind 60, 60, 60. Shall we shake the bag? Shall we? All together, and you will...
Here, to the very last, an almost Victorian class system endured. At the top, a first-class suite costing $3,000 one way. Cabin class, smaller and deeper in the ship for some $300. And tourist, mostly young people sharing cabins at a rock-bottom fare. Offering luxury and leisure no one seemed to want, the Queens were losing millions of dollars a year. Finally, on May 8th, 1967, when both the Mary and Elizabeth were at sea, their captains simultaneously opened sealed letters and read them to their crews. Thus was announced the end for both ships. The Mary would go first, within a matter of months.
I'm always very sorry to see a very nice ship end its days, but it's inevitable, of course, that both ships and us have a time limit, and the day must come when we go. And this applies to ships as much as to human beings.
In September, the Queen Mary left New York for the last time. It was 31 years since she first arrived here on her maiden voyage. Today, the Queen Mary has become a museum in California. The Queen Elizabeth has long since been scrapped. And even the QE2, virtually alone on the Atlantic, has been losing money. One factor, of course, is the price of oil. Every 24 hours on the Atlantic, the QE2 burns $80,000 worth of fuel. The meter records intake not in gallons or liters, but in tons. Passengers on this last of the transatlantic superliners come with high expectations. To attract them, the style of the luxury liner must be maintained regardless of cost. But an all-out effort is being made to reduce unprofitable turnaround time in port.
We'll have to turn around this time in 6 hours, which is virtually the record the ship can do. And in that 6 hours, we'll take 4,500 tons of oil, 2,000 tons of water, and 85 tons of stores. Yes, we can do it, with the cooperation of the crew. And they know the situation that we're in, and they'll cooperate, and we'll do it.
Come on! Come on now!
For many of the QE2's crew, 5 days of hard work are now climaxed by 6 hours of greater effort. Especially for cabin attendants, there's barely time to peer out a porthole. Old-timers remember hilarious nights on the town in Manhattan, but those days are gone.
Now, never get ashore. If I was young, I'd be very annoyed, but I'm pretty old, so I don't mind staying here.
The young and energetic may steal a couple of hours ashore, but before nightfall, the QE2 will sail again, a fugitive from modern economic realities, running for her very life.
Crew gangway to bridge, all clear. Bridge out. Let go everything.
Well, I'm not prepared to think about it being taken off service or changed. I haven't mentally even thought about it. I'm confident that we will keep running somehow or other.
These docks have greeted millions and seen millions wave goodbye. Now there is but one superliner that calls here, and often only a handful to bid her bon voyage. Once upon a time, an advertising slogan claimed that on a ship, getting there is half the fun. The words could not forestall the jet age, nor spare the superliners the twilight of their fame. And yet the phrase rings painfully true on a summer night as the great ship echoes with music and laughter, and the great Atlantic lies beyond.
The posh style of travel to and from Europe has gotten even more posh. Last year, the Queen Elizabeth II was fitted with new diesel engines and additional luxury accommodations at a cost of $130 million. The economics of shipping have improved, but the QE2 remains the last of her class to make transatlantic crossings. Next time on the Best of the National Geographic Specials, we'll explore another corner of this endlessly rewarding and surprising world around us. I'm Mike Farrell for the National Geographic Society.
National Geographic wishes to acknowledge Chevron for making possible the National Geographic Specials.